Multipolar Science, unified science of interactions of nature and humans. No one understood unified science until you watch this video. History of multipolar science. First, physics for all beliefs. Initial research on QED effects in helium, published in 1996. It was model of neutral coexistence of relativistic and non-relativistic beliefs of QED. Second, Peace Rule in 2000, published in the name of Association Rules for Science of Data. Third milestone, Peace Science in 2022. It is science of interactions of humans. First, science of interactions of humans. Then, finally, multipolar science. 2025, it's grand unification of all sciences, of all interactions of nature and humans. Let's take a look at the existing sciences by category. First one, science of nature. It's called formal science. It's a quantitative description of nature, such as pure mathematics. Second, science of interactions of nature. That's the natural sciences. It's also quantitative description of interactions of nature. Third, science of interactions of humans. It's called social science. However, the standard is different now. It's qualitative description of interactions of humans instead of quantitative. Applied science, applications of science. Now, the new multipolar science categorized by scope of science. First, nature. That's the input of the model of science, and the result is science of nature, mapping to existing pure mathematics, quantitative description of nature. And the second, science of interactions of nature, that's one-to-one mapping to existing natural science, a quantitative description of interactions of nature. Now, third one is science of interaction of humans. Now, it is a quantitative description of interaction of humans for first time in the name of peace science. In comparison, existing social sciences are still qualitative description of interactions of humans. Then, unified science of interactions of nature and humans. It's multipolar science, also quantitative description of interactions of nature and humans. So in terms of scientific method, all four sciences are the same, quantitative description. That's not the case for existing Western sciences. So what is multipolarity? What it really means is what is objective multipolarity. Nobody ever seen that. So here we list 4 important steps to understand multipolarity. What is multipolarity objectively? The first step is scientific requirements. That is, all the key requirements for anything to be called multipolarity. You have to meet those requirements. Second, objective definition based on scientific requirements to capture those requirements in objective definition of multipolarity. Third, translate those requirements into scientific language for model. It's a scientific definition to capture models that capture the requirements in the model. Lastly, scientific standard for testing any model of multipolarity. You have to meet all the requirements to be called multipolarity. Now, what are objective requirements? Three key requirements for multipolarity. The first one, obviously, is the purpose, the most important one. Purpose of the concept of multipolarity. It has to be equal and fair, described, defined for everyone and all beliefs. No discrimination against anyone or any belief. Second, objective scope. So everything from interactions of nature and humans is in scope for multipolarity. This is very important. That's what objective scope require. It can't do partial subjectively. Third method has to be quantitative for every single case of multipolarity. Now, the last one is scientific standard for multipolarity. It is a standard to determine what is and what is not multipolarity by meeting the requirements for multipolarity. Let's take a look at the Western definitions of multipolarity from Google AI and Wikipedia. Those two definitions are obviously subjective. Why? It tells you what is subjectively multipolarity. It doesn't tell you objectively what is the purpose for one belief, for all, for everyone and all beliefs. Doesn't tell you the scope. Does it include everything or just subjectively describe particular situation? In this case, they only subjectively describe particular system in international relations. That's subjective. Third, it doesn't tell you what's the method to describe multipolarity or unipolarity. Has to be quantitative in order to be qualified for objective description. Now, let's look at what is objective definition of multipolarity. So the key difference is subjective multipolarity tells you what is subjectively multipolarity. In contrast, objective multipolarity doesn't tell you what is subjectively multipolarity, but rather what are the requirements and standard to meet for something to be called multipolarity. And that's the definition we gave here. It tells you it's a quantitative description of the concept of multipolarity that is equal and fair for everyone and all beliefs. It has to be tested and validated by scientific standard for multipolarity. So it captures the method has to be quantitative. The purpose has to be equal and fair for everyone and all beliefs. It does not subjectively tell you the scope. That means everything that is qualified for multipolarity is in scope. And also, it tells you has to be validated, tested by scientific standard for multipolarity. So you see the difference. Subjective definition from Google AI and Wikipedia tells you subjectively what is specific multipolarity. And here, we don't tell you subjectively what is multipolarity, but rather what are the requirements and the standard you have to meet for anything that is qualified for multipolarity to be called multipolarity. Now, the most important model is the purpose of multipolarity. Basically, it's a model to capture the most important requirement for all beliefs equal and fair. What we have is a model of coexistence of all beliefs to capture all beliefs. We also have a model of neutrality to capture equality and fairness. Combined, it's a model of neutral coexistence to capture equality and fairness for all beliefs of the concept of multipolarity. Now, we have now requirements, and then we have objective definition. It's time to translate them into scientific language called the model. So basically, develop a model to capture all the requirements. So it's a 3 key points for scientific definition of multipolarity. First one, define what is multipolarity for all beliefs. That is, multipolarity equals a neutral coexistence of all beliefs of the concept of multipolarity. Second, and the first one is really test environment, to create a test environment to capture everything that's qualified for multipolarity for all beliefs. Then second one is to create a control environment. This is very similar to testing new drug. You need to have a test environment and control environment. In test environment, that's a real drug. Say here is in test environment, that's real multipolarity. But in control environment, it's defined as the opposite to multipolarity, which is unipolarity. That is a non-neutral coexistence of all beliefs of multipolarity. And similar to testing environment, the control environment for testing new drug, the control environment is set to capture dummy or fake drug. Thirdly, all of those two in test environment and control environment must be quantified by Peace rule, which is to calculate quantitatively the relationship, this coexistence relationship between all beliefs, approximate by a dominant belief of PA and opposite belief of PB. That relationship gives the characteristic of multipolarity, whether it's for all beliefs or for one belief. Now, we have the definition, we have the model, we have the test environment, we have control environment, we have a mathematical formula to calculate real multipolarity for all belief and dummy multipolarity for one belief. So we want to test every single potential candidate for multipolarity, and everyone is modeled and look at the output of each model, how to determine the characteristic of each model, right? First, scientific standard of multipolarity. It is the scientific standard of independence of one belief or independence of multipolarity for the concept or model of multipolarity. And that standard its quantitative description on its own, and basically it divides any output of the model into two categories, well, similar to new drug testing, into two environments. One is test environment that capture all models of the multipolarity for all beliefs. The second is control environment that capture all the models of multipolarity for one belief. But in each environment, there is two distinct characteristics, and that's why we have now 4 different buckets to capture different outputs by different characteristics. The first one is maximum multipolarity for all beliefs that has zero risk tolerance of unipolarity. Second one is also, second bucket capture multipolarity but has a risk tolerance, non-zero risk tolerance of unipolarity. Third bucket capture unipolarity but it has a risk tolerance of multipolarity. It's not entirely unipolarity. There's a risk of tolerance of multipolarity. And the last bucket capture maximum unipolarity that has zero risk tolerance of multipolarity. Okay, and now we have 4 buckets that produced by the scientific standard of multipolarity, and apply that to any model of multipolarity to determine the characteristic of each model. So this is the output of multipolar model, and depends on the characteristic, quantified characteristic, go into 4 different, any of those 4 different buckets. The first one, obviously, is a maximum multipolarity for all beliefs with 100% confidence. And the second one also captures multipolarity for all beliefs, but with less than 100% confidence. Third bucket captures unipolarity with less than 100% confidence. And last one, maximum unipolarity, means without multipolarity with 100% confidence. Summary. We present objective definition of multipolarity for first time. This is objective definition of multipolarity, or any concept that never seen anywhere before. Second, the first scientific standard for multipolarity, which is scientific standard of multipolarity. The importance of that standard is to eliminate double standard for all sciences. Third, it's a multipolarity for all beliefs. That's real multipolarity for everyone, instead of a subjective definition of multipolarity only for one belief. That's not real. So no existing multipolarity meet requirement and standard for multipolarity for all beliefs. Lastly, we argue that multipolarity that is equal and fair, defined and described for everyone and all beliefs, is fundamental human right and freedom of speech for everyone and all belief. It's very important why we emphasize that, because the human concept of human rights being misunderstood. Anything that is described for everyone and all belief is human right. On the other hand, current subjective definition from the West of multipolarity is not human right. The reason for that is because it's for one belief, not for everyone and all beliefs. That's the difference. That's why it is human right. Thank you.